Hi there and welcome back. Today's story isn't about crime or mystery or unsolved cases. There are no villains, no detectives, no chase. Instead, it's about time silence and the quiet kind of wisdom that only life can teach us, if we're willing to sit and listen. If you've ever felt tired of chasing things that never seem to bring peace, if you've ever wanted to just stop, breathe, and feel the world again, then this story is for you. Stay until the end. And if it speaks to you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Or maybe, go find your own river to sit beside. The first time I saw him, I was 9 years old, barefoot, and carrying a plastic sword I'd gotten from the summer fair. It was late June, the kind of June that melts popsicles faster than you can eat them and turns the gravel on the road into something like lava beneath your feet. I remember my shirt sticking to my back, the slap of my soles on hot pavement, and the sound of cicadas screaming from every tree. The river was only 3 blocks from my house, and in those days it felt like the edge of the world. It curved around the town like an old arm, lazy and slow, and the grown-ups said you weren't supposed to go near it alone. But I wasn't really going to the river. I was on a mission. I was looking for the neighborhood cat that had kittens in Mrs. Holloway's shed, or at least, that's what I told myself to justify going where I wasn't allowed. But that day I didn't find the cat, I found him. He sat on the same bench he would sit on for years after an old wooden thing half buried in the grass, close enough to the river that he could probably dip his toes in if he wanted to. He didn't move when I walked up. Didn't even turn his head. He just sat there, elbows resting on his knees, staring out at the water like it was telling him secrets. He looked like a ghost someone forgot to bury, thin-tanned and all bones and shadow. His gray hair was tied in a short, messy ponytail. He wore a flannel shirt with holes in the elbows, jeans bleached by the sun, and boots with cracked leather. His beard was the kind of beard that only happens when you've stopped caring about mirrors. He could have been 70. He could have been 50. You couldn't really tell. "Are you a hobo?" I asked. 9-year-olds don't have filters. He didn't look at me right away. He just let out this small, breathy laugh. The kind that sounds more like a sigh that forgot how to end. "No," he said, "but I might be to someone who thinks they aren't." I didn't understand what he meant. Not really. But I sat down on the other end of the bench anyway. I figured if he was dangerous, he'd look more like a pirate or a man from the TV. But he just looked tired. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Listening." "To what?" He tapped the side of his head with one finger. "Everything. Nothing. Whatever comes." I scrunched my face. "You mean like the river?" He smiled just barely, "Especially the river." We sat in silence for a long time, at least what felt like a long time to a kid who was used to noise and cartoons and grown-ups telling him what to do. Eventually, I got bored. I slapped a mosquito on my leg, stood up, and pointed my plastic sword at the sky. "Well, I'm going to go find the kittens," I declared, as if I had any idea where to look. "Be careful," he said. "Some things disappear when you're trying too hard to find them." That was the first thing he ever told me that made me stop and think. Of course, I didn't really understand it then. I thought he meant the kittens. But later, much later, I realized he was talking about something else entirely. For the next few years, I saw him almost every week, sometimes from a distance, sometimes up close. He never missed a morning, rain or shine, summer or winter. He was always there by the river, sitting on that same bench, staring at the same water that never stopped moving. The people in town called him the Riverman. Some said he was a war vet who lost his family. Others claimed he used to be a professor at a university who just snapped one day and walked away from it all. I once overheard a gas station clerk say he'd seen the Riverman with a suitcase full of money back in the 80s, then gave it all away and never spoke again. No one really knew. No one asked. Except me. I started visiting him on purpose around the time I turned 11. I'd bring a sandwich or a book or just questions. He never told me his name, never asked mine either. We didn't need to. He never gave direct answers. Talking to him was like talking to a stone that somehow echoed your own voice back, but quieter, softer, truer. He didn't give advice so much as presence. He let you be. Let the moment stretch and breathe without shoving anything into it. It was weird. And yet the more time I spent with him, the more I liked it. Because life outside the river was getting louder. My parents fought more. School got harder. Friends moved away or turned mean. But the river stayed the same. And so did the man beside it. One morning I asked him, "Why do you come here every day?" He looked at me. Really, looked for the first time. His eyes were this pale blue, not cold, not sharp, but full of something I didn't have a name for then. Because the river doesn't ask me to be anything he said. That stuck with me. I didn't get it yet, but it stuck. Years passed. I grew taller. I got braces. I started caring about haircuts and girls and brands of sneakers. My visits to the river got fewer, more spaced out. I told myself I was busy. Soccer, homework, college prep. The truth was, I was learning how to forget, how to drown in the noise of becoming someone. By the time I graduated high school, I hadn't seen him in almost a year. And when I left for college, I told myself the river was just a place for kids and loners and old men with too much time. I didn't need it anymore. I was moving on, up, forward. But the thing about rivers, they wait. They always wait. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had everything people said you were supposed to want. A downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a job with a title long enough to sound impressive on business cards, a wardrobe that looked nothing like the clothes I used to wear back when I sat by the river with the man who never asked my name. My days were full, calendar booked, inbox full, notifications pinging, coffee always half cold and half drunk. People called it the grind, like it was something noble, like slowly shaving your soul down to a sliver was the price of becoming someone worthwhile. And I paid it. Willingly. At first it felt like winning. Promotions praise people who remembered my name in boardrooms. I was rising higher, faster, louder. I wore success like armor and convinced myself it was enough. I even started saying things like, "I'll rest when I'm ahead and you can't slow down in this economy like that." Somehow made me wise instead of exhausted. But at night, when the noise died down and the screens went dark, something hollow hummed beneath it all. I didn't tell anyone. Because in the world I lived in now, emptiness was weakness. Stillness was failure. Silence was suspect. So I filled it. With meetings, deadlines, nights out with people who laughed too loud and never asked real questions. I became a master of conversation without connection, a champion of presence without attention. Until one day my father called, voice flat. He said, "Your mom's sick. They found something in her lungs." It felt like the universe had tossed a rock into the shallow puddle I called my peace. I flew home that weekend. My childhood bedroom still smelled like wood polish and dust. The posters on the wall were faded, but still there, memories of a boy who used to believe in magic and monsters and the river that curved like a secret through the edge of town. I sat in that room, older and thinner and worn, and something in me cracked. That Sunday I went to the river. It had been nearly 7 years since I last walked that dirt path. The trees seemed taller. The bench looked smaller. The grass was a little browner. But the river was exactly the same. Still slow, still soft, still singing a song with no lyrics and no end. And he was there. Same flannel shirt, same boots, same beard with more white in it now. His back was curved more than I remembered, but he still sat, like the earth didn't owe him a thing. I stood behind him for a minute, afraid he wouldn't recognize me, afraid he would. Then I walked forward and sat down without saying a word. He didn't look at me. Didn't need to. "Back again," he said. His voice was rougher, more wind than sound. "Yeah," I answered. He didn't ask why. I didn't explain. We just sat like no time had passed at all. After a while he said, "The river remembers." I turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Remembers what?" "Everything. It just doesn't hold on to it." I let that sink in. Let it stretch out between us like the water. "I thought I outgrew this place," I said quietly. "Like I was supposed to move on." He chuckled. "Funny thing about moving on. Sometimes we go so far we forget what we were moving toward." I swallowed hard. My throat was tight. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he felt it, the quiet unraveling of something I'd tried to keep wrapped for too long. I've been tired, I admitted. Good, he said. Good. He finally looked at me. His eyes were softer than I remembered. Less blue, more gray, but full of the same strange peace. Tired is the first honest thing most people feel when they stop pretending, he said. It's the body's way of saying, you can rest now. I looked down at my hands. They didn't look like mine anymore. They looked like tools, like something used too much and cared for too little. I forgot how to sit still, I said. He nodded slowly. Most people do, until life sits them down for them. I wanted to cry. I didn't, but the river must have seen it. The way I clenched my jaw, the way my fingers dug into the bench, the way I stared at the water like it might offer something back. We sat for over an hour that day. I didn't check my phone, didn't think about emails, didn't plan my next move. I just sat, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Present. I came back the next morning. And the next. And the next. For the 2 weeks I stayed home while Mom went through her tests and treatments, while Dad hovered like a ghost of his former self, I went to the river every day. And every day the man was there. We didn't talk much. But when we did, his words stayed with me longer than most conversations I'd had in years. One morning I asked, "Why here? Why this bench, this river?" He shrugged, "Because it doesn't need me." I frowned. "Wouldn't you want to be somewhere you matter?" He smiled faintly. "I do matter, just not in the way people think." I didn't understand. He went on, "Most people need to be needed. They chase roles, titles, relationships, trying to prove they belong. But when you sit somewhere that doesn't care who you are, you get to be just you." I stared at the water quiet for a long time. "Do you ever miss who you used to be?" I asked. He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Sometimes. But not the way you think. I don't miss the person. I miss the illusion, the idea that if I did enough was enough, I'd finally feel full." He paused, then added softly, "I stopped chasing full, started making peace with enough. When it came time to return to the city, I didn't want to go. I packed slowly, said goodbye to my parents, hugged my mom longer than usual. She smelled like tea and lemon-scented detergent. Then I drove to the river one last time. He was already there. I stood beside the bench instead of sitting. "I don't know when I'll be back," I said. He nodded. I hesitated. "Can I ask you one last question?" He looked up at me. "Were you always like this? This calm?" He smiled, and it was a sad smile. Not because he was unhappy, but because he knew I didn't really want the answer. "No," he said. "I had to lose everything that wasn't real before I found what was." I swallowed hard. What was it? He looked at the river. Stillness. Then he added forgiveness, letting the past go without demanding it apologize first. I sat down beside him one last time. We watched the river roll by. No more words, because some things are too sacred for language. I went back to the city and tried to slip into my old life, the way you slip into a shirt that used to fit until you realize it doesn't hug you in the same places anymore. That's what it felt like. Everything still looked the same: my apartment with its clean lines and expensive emptiness, my desk with its sleek screens and high-speed expectations, the people who shook my hand with purpose and smiled without softness. But something had shifted. Or maybe I had. I'd always told myself that growing up meant building a life brick by brick: degree, job, condo, status, security. And if you stacked the bricks just right, tall enough and strong enough, the wind wouldn't reach you. You'd be safe, untouchable. But no one told me what to do when the wind came from inside. The first week back, I caught myself staring out my office window too long, watching clouds move slowly over buildings that didn't breathe. On conference calls, I found myself distracted by the way people talked like clock hands, always ticking forward, never stopping to wonder why they moved the way they did. Emails went unanswered longer. Deadlines didn't carry the same weight. Even the word career started to sound hollow, like a song on repeat too long. I kept hearing his voice. Tired is the first honest thing most people feel when they stop pretending. At first, I tried to fight it. Tried to dive back into the current I'd been swimming in for years, but it was like trying to rejoin a conversation you'd already stopped believing in. And then one night I couldn't sleep. The city buzzed around me, sirens in the distance, neighbors talking on their balconies, car doors slamming like punctuation marks. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, and all I could think about was the bench. That old weather-worn bench by the river where no one needed me to be anything but present. So I got up. I didn't even bother putting on real clothes, just jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers. I grabbed my keys, locked the door behind me, and walked. Not to the river, I couldn't. It was hundreds of miles away, but I needed stillness. I needed somewhere. I ended up in a park 3 blocks from my apartment. It wasn't much, just a patch of grass and a man-made pond that reflected the city lights like broken glass. But there was a bench. I sat, and I breathed. That was the first time I realized I could carry the river with me. Not the water, not the place, but the space it gave me, the permission to slow down, to listen without reacting, to be without producing. And in that silence, I started asking questions I'd been too busy to ask. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Who am I performing for? What would happen if I stopped chasing things that didn't feel like mine? They weren't easy questions. In fact, they scared the hell out of me. Because for the first time in years, I had no rehearsed answers, no tidy philosophies, no motivational slogans to hide behind. Just raw truth. Just me. The next morning, I called in sick to work. No lies, just told them I needed space. They didn't ask questions. Maybe they knew. I spent the day walking without destination. No podcasts in my ears. No agenda. I wandered into a used bookstore and found myself drawn to the philosophy section. A strange feeling like the part of me that had once listened to riddles by a river was waking up again. I bought a book called Letters to a Young Poet, read it cover to cover in one sitting. There was a line that hit me like a stone. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. I closed the book and cried. Not because I was sad, but because something in me finally felt seen. Over the next few weeks, I made changes, small ones at first. I started walking more, left my phone on airplane mode for hours at a time, cooked real meals instead of ordering out, called my parents not because I had news, but because I wanted to hear their voices. At work, I spoke more slowly. I stopped pretending to know everything. I let silence into conversations, not as awkwardness, but as respect, as breathing room. Some people didn't understand. A few pulled away. But the ones who stayed deeper. Then one evening, I got the call. My mom. Her voice cracking. It's back, she said. The cancer, this time in her spine. Everything else went quiet. I booked a flight that night. When I arrived, she was thinner, but not weaker. She greeted me with the same warm arms I'd fallen asleep in as a child. Dad stood beside her, looking like someone who hadn't slept in weeks, but would never admit it. We didn't talk much that night, just sat together. 3 souls bound not by blood, but by shared waiting. The next morning, I went to the river. I didn't expect him to be there, but he was. He looked up as I approached, eyes steady, hands resting on his knees. You came back, he said. I nodded. It's worse this time. He didn't ask for details, didn't offer empty comfort, just shifted slightly on the bench and made space for me to sit. I did. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The river moved and we watched. Then he said, almost whispering, there's a kind of grief that doesn't scream. It just sits with you until you stop needing to outrun it. I looked at him, surprised. He turned his head, met my eyes. I know that grief, he said. I used to think silence was empty. Now I know. It's full of everything words can't carry. I blinked back tears. I'm scared, I said. He didn't flinch. Of course you are, he replied. That means you love. We sat there until the sun dipped below the trees, until the shadows stretched long and the bugs came out, until I didn't feel scared alone anymore. Just held, not by him, not even by the river, but by something wordless that I think was truth. That night I dreamt of being a child again, barefoot, holding a plastic sword, running toward the river, not away. And when I got there, the man wasn't sitting. He was standing. And he said, you don't have to keep searching. Just start remembering. Then he turned and walked into the trees. He never told me much about his past, not directly. He didn't sit down and say, here's who I used to be. He wasn't that kind of man. Instead, he let it come in pieces, drifting stories, half-phrases, metaphors that wrapped truth in fog. It was like he was giving me a puzzle but not asking me to solve it. Just hold it, turn it over, feel the shape of it in my hands. It took time, years really. But that fall, after Mom's second round of treatment began, and I found myself back in my childhood town more often than I expected, I started visiting the river every day again. Not always with something to say, not always hoping he'd speak, just to sit. And slowly he opened. That's when I first heard the name Eli. It came one morning when the leaves were just beginning to turn. A breeze moved through the trees like breath over skin. I brought him coffee, black no sugar, just the way he never asked for it, but always drank it. He took the cup in his calloused hands, nodded a silent thank you, and said without looking at me, "You remind me of someone. His name was Eli." I didn't speak. I'd learned not to break the spell when he chose to speak first. He was younger than me, maybe by 10 years, smart, brighter than I ever was, but stubborn in the kind of way that makes people powerful, not impossible. He sipped the coffee. We built a business together, years ago. I won't tell you what kind, doesn't matter now. But we thought we were changing the world, thought we'd cracked some code no one else had cracked. We worked 80 hours a week, lived on caffeine, ego, and adrenaline, thought that was what made us real men. I could hear something catch in his throat. But when you build something fast with hands that don't know how to rest, sometimes the foundation's not strong enough to hold the weight. He fell silent again. I waited. Eventually he said, "One night I got a call. Eli had been driving home after another late night at the office. Highway, wet roads. He fell asleep at the wheel. His eyes didn't water, but his voice changed. Soft, hollow. I was supposed to drive him that night. We flipped a coin. I lost. Thought I was the unlucky one. I stared at the river, unsure if I should speak. So I didn't. Sometimes silence is a better companion than any response." After a while, he added, "I quit everything the next day. Walked out. Didn't pack up the office. Didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. Everyone would have looked at me and seen guilt instead of grief. And maybe they'd have been right. I looked at him then. Really looked. His face was lined like the bark of an old tree, but his eyes, those eyes, held something vast. Not just sadness, something deeper. A kind of surrender. "Is that when you came here?" I asked. He nodded slowly. Not right away. First, I tried to lose myself the usual ways. Liquor, women, moving cities, changing names. But everywhere I went, I brought myself with me. The same weight, the same echo. It followed me until I finally stopped running and let it sit beside me. He glanced toward the water. "I came here because the river doesn't judge, doesn't label you the one who left or the one who failed. It just flows, and I needed to learn how to flow again." That day changed how I saw him. He wasn't just a quiet man with a beard and a flannel shirt. He was a carrier of stories he no longer needed to shout. A survivor of grief that didn't make headlines but still shook the earth. A man who had chosen solitude not as punishment but as peace. I asked him something I'd never asked before. "What was your name before all of this?" He looked at me, and for a second I thought he might actually tell me. But instead, he smiled slow and kind. "It doesn't matter now," he said. "That name belonged to a man who thought life was a ladder. I've since learned it's more of a river." I nodded. And in that moment I didn't need to know, because he'd already given me more than any name ever could. That night I sat with my mom in the hospital. Her skin was pale and her breaths were shallower than last week, but her eyes still sparkled when she smiled. "I heard you've been going to the river again," she said. I was surprised. "How'd you know?" "Small towns talk," she whispered, amused. "And besides, I know you. I know what heals you." I took her hand in mine. It was warm but trembling. "Do you think I've wasted too much time?" I asked suddenly. She tilted her head. "In life." I nodded. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said no. "I think you just finally realized that time isn't something to fill, it's something to feel. And that's more than most people ever learn." I held her hand tighter. "Do you think it's too late?" Her smile was soft. For what? To change. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. Miles, you're not late. You're on time. And every day you come back to yourself is a day not wasted. The next morning I returned to the river. The man was already there. Same bench, same posture. But something about him looked different. Not older, not tired. Just ready. As I sat down beside him, he turned to me. I think you're almost ready, he said. I raised an eyebrow. For what? To stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. I didn't answer, because deep down I knew he was right. All these years I'd been hauling expectations, identities, guilt roles that weren't really mine. They were masks, outfits, versions of me I thought I had to become. But none of them ever fit like that bench did. None of them made space for stillness. He stood up for the first time in a long while, stretched his back, rolled his shoulders. Come, he said, I want to show you something. I followed him down a narrow trail that led deeper into the woods beside the river. Leaves crunched underfoot. Birds called out like echoes from another world. After 10 minutes, we reached a clearing I'd never seen before. There was a small wooden box tucked beneath a tree. He knelt and opened it. Inside were photographs. Old, faded, edges curled. He handed me one. 2 men standing side by side. One of them was him, much younger, clean-shaven, wearing a suit. The other, Eli, I presumed, smiling like he hadn't learned heartbreak yet. Sometimes, he said, you don't need to forget in order to let go. You just need to remember without reliving. I placed the photo back gently. He closed the box. We stood there for a while saying nothing, because there are some moments too full for words. The more time I spent with him, the more I began to realize some people carry their pain like luggage. They drag it with them, heavy and obvious. Others wear it like a second skin, quiet, constant, almost invisible. And then there are those who sit beside rivers. They don't carry it at all, not because they're free of it, but because they've learned to let the water hold it for them. I didn't know how to do that yet. I was still holding too tightly to things I didn't even understand. Titles, expectations, regrets I hadn't dared to name. But something had begun shifting in me, and the first sign of that shift came the morning I admitted to myself that I no longer wanted to go back to my old life. Not fully. Not the way it had been. It wasn't one big epiphany, just a quiet realization like mist rising off the river's surface. I sat there, coffee in hand, watching him toss pebbles into the water, and I said without looking at him, I think I've built a life I don't belong in. He didn't stop tossing stones, didn't react, just said, that's the beginning. Of what? Truth. I let the words settle. I thought he might say more, but he didn't. The silence between us felt deeper than usual, like we were both listening to something neither of us had spoken out loud. Eventually I said, why do people stay in places they know they've outgrown? He skipped a stone across the water. Once, twice, gone. Because they're afraid the unknown will hurt more than the familiar that already does. That landed hard. I felt something twist in my chest. I'd spent so much of my adult life chasing security, financial, emotional, professional, that I'd forgotten the cost. It was always just a little more, a little further, a little longer. The promise of rest always dangling just past the next promotion, the next raise, the next checkbox. But I was exhausted. Not the kind that sleep fixes. The kind that lingers in your bones, the kind that makes even joy feel heavy. And suddenly I remembered something he had said years ago, back when I was just a kid with a plastic sword and scraped up knees. Some things disappear when you're trying too hard to find them. Back then I thought he was talking about kittens. Now I knew better. He was talking about peace. Later that afternoon I went home to check on Mom. She was in her chair by the window, a blanket over her knees, a book in her lap. She looked up and smiled when I walked in, and that smile, God, that smile, was the most honest thing I'd seen all day. How's the river? She asked. Still flowing. She patted the chair beside her. I sat down. Remember when you were little, she said, and you used to come home with pockets full of stones. I smiled. I thought they were lucky. You always gave them names. You said the smooth ones were wise and the ones with cracks were brave. I forgot about that. She turned her head toward me. Her eyes were glassy but sharp. You've always known how to see meaning in small things, she said. Don't let the world make you forget that. I didn't know what to say. So I held her hand, and let that moment do what words couldn't. That night I returned to the river again. He wasn't there. It was the first time I'd found the bench empty. I sat anyway. At first I felt disappointed, then restless, then calm. I looked at the place he usually sat and realized something: I didn't need him to be there for the river to speak. Because the stillness was already inside me now. A little quieter maybe, a little newer. But it was there. I closed my eyes. Listened. The wind in the leaves, the slow churn of water over rocks, my own breath softer than I remembered. And then a memory. I was 12, hiding in the backyard behind the shed after a fight with my dad, angry, confused, certain no one understood me. I'd thrown a stick at the fence and yelled into the wind. That's when Mom came out. She didn't scold me, didn't ask what happened. She just sat beside me in the dirt, her jeans getting stained, and said, "Even big feelings need a quiet place to land." At the time I'd rolled my eyes. Now I understood. The next morning he was back, as if he'd never missed a day. I didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't offer. Some absences don't need explanation, they need space. We sat for a while before he finally spoke. "You're starting to hear it now, aren't you?" I looked at him. "Hear what?" He tapped his chest, not his ears. "The part of you that doesn't need noise to feel alive." I nodded. Because he was right. There was something inside me, call it soul spirit center, that had been buried under years of deadlines and identity. It wasn't gone, just quiet, waiting. And now it had begun to speak. Not in words, but in knowing, in stillness, in the way the river didn't beg to be noticed yet, was always there. Later that week I began writing again. Not for work, not for others. Just for myself. Late at night, after my parents went to sleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table and scribble down thoughts, observations, memories, things I hadn't let myself feel in years. I wrote about Eli, though I'd never met him. I wrote about the first time I saw the riverman. I wrote about Mom's smile and Dad's silence and the way grief hums under the skin like a quiet engine. And slowly I began to notice something. My voice was changing. Not just my writing voice. My inner voice. The one that used to bark orders, criticize, pressure, perform. Now it asked softer questions. What do you love? What do you miss? What do you want to carry forward? And what are you finally ready to set down? The next time I saw him, I brought a stone. Smooth, gray, heavy in the hand. I placed it on the bench between us. He looked at it, then at me. "A burden?" he asked. I shook my head. "A memory." He picked it up, turned it over. "Sometimes they're the same thing," he said. Then he stood up and walked down to the edge of the water. He turned to me and held out the stone. "Say something you never said," he said. I hesitated. Then out loud I said, "I'm sorry for making my life so small just to feel safe." He nodded. Then he tossed the stone into the water. We watched it sink without a sound, and I swear right then I felt a part of me go with it. Not lost. Just lighter. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice silence, the way some people notice a favorite scent, gentle, familiar, and strangely comforting. It was everywhere now. Not the loud kind of silence that feels awkward or empty, but the kind that's alive. Breathing. I used to fill every pause with something sound movement plans, but now I found myself lingering in the spaces between things, letting time stretch without apology. I still visited the river every morning. Some days he was already there. Other days I arrived first. But there was a rhythm now, an unspoken flow between us as natural as the current itself. He didn't speak as much anymore, and I didn't ask for it. He had already given me more than words. What remained between us was understanding rooted in presence, watered by grief and stretched by time. One morning I found a feather on the bench when I arrived. It was small, pale gray, and curved like a question mark. I picked it up, turned it in my fingers, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I smiled. When he came walking out of the trees 10 minutes later, I held it up. "Message from the birds?" I asked. He squinted at it, then said, "Gift from the wind." "What's it mean?" He sat beside me slowly, like his bones were remembering how. "That depends on who's holding it." I looked at it again this time with more care. Then I think I said, "It means I'm learning to stay still." He nodded. "Then it's done its job." That day I told him about the city, about how my coworkers barely asked why I'd stayed away so long, and how strangely that didn't bother me. I told him I wasn't sure I wanted to go back, or if I did, I wasn't sure I wanted to return as the same version of myself who left. "I used to think ambition was a straight road," I said. "Now it feels more like a spiral. I keep coming back to the same questions, but from different angles." "Then you're evolving," he said. I looked at him. "Is that what you did, evolve?" He chuckled softly. "No." I unraveled. I blinked. "Isn't that the opposite? Sometimes the only way to evolve is to let everything fall apart first." That night, I found myself rereading the things I'd written in the margins of my old notebooks. Thoughts I didn't even remember writing. Fragments of moments I thought I'd forgotten. Maybe peace is just the absence of needing to prove anything. I don't want to be admired anymore. I want to be known. Let this day be enough. I underlined that last one. Let this day be enough. The next morning, I brought him a thermos of tea instead of coffee. He didn't say anything about the change, just uncapped it, took a sip, and said, "Jasmine." I nodded, figured something lighter might suit today. We sat in silence watching the water glint in the rising sun. After a while, I said, "Do you ever think about leaving?" He didn't look at me, just exhaled through his nose. "No," he said, "but I think about not needing to stay." "What's the difference?" "If you leave because you're running, the weight follows you. If you leave because you've learned what you came to learn, the river lets you go." I thought about that. "I don't know if I'm ready." He turned to me, then his eyes soft. "You will be, when it's time." That afternoon I helped my dad in the garden. He didn't say much, but his hands moved with purpose. We dug up weeds and clipped dead flowers and repotted herbs. There was something healing about it, working the soil, tending to something that grew slow, honest. He handed me a spade without looking at me and said, "Your mother likes the lavender here. It makes her feel calmer." I nodded and dug. Then he said almost under his breath, "I'm scared too." I froze. Not because I didn't expect it, but because I never thought I'd hear him admit it. I looked over. He wasn't crying, but he wasn't hiding either. "She's the heart of this place," he said. "Always has been." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "We'll hold it together, you and me." He looked at me and something passed between us. Not an agreement, not a promise. Just understanding. Like river to stone. Later that night, I sat alone on the back porch, listening to the distant hum of cicadas. I thought about time, not the hours or the dates, but the texture of it. How some moments stretch, others snap, and a few settle, like dust on still water. I realized I wasn't afraid of change anymore. I was afraid of forgetting what mattered once things changed. And so I promised myself something simple: to remember the river, to return to stillness, even when life became loud again. The next morning he didn't come. I waited. Long past sunrise, long past when the birds began to quiet. The bench felt too wide without him. Too light. I walked down the trail where we'd once found the box under the tree, half expecting to find a note, a sign, a message. Nothing. Just silence. But it didn't feel empty. It felt full. I sat on the grass and closed my eyes. I could still hear him. Not in words. In presence. In the way the river curved unhurried. In the wind that pressed gently on my back like a hand that wasn't there. In the understanding that maybe he had already told me everything I needed to know. He didn't come the next day either, or the day after. And eventually I stopped waiting. Not out of bitterness. Not out of grief. But because I understood he had let the river carry him forward. And now it was my turn to stay. To listen. To begin living in the stillness he left behind. After he stopped coming, I thought the bench might feel empty, but it didn't. It felt like it remembered. And that was enough. He had sat there for years, giving silence to strangers who didn't know they needed it, including me. And now that he was gone, wherever he'd gone, the river didn't feel any lonelier. If anything, it felt wiser. It was never about him. It was about what he allowed to take root. Stillness, space, surrender. Those things hadn't left. They were beginning to grow in me now like seeds I hadn't realized had been planted. My mother's condition worsened. The cancer had spread to her spine, then her lungs again. Some days she could walk, some days she couldn't. But always she smiled when I came into the room. "You've changed," she said once, reaching for my hand. "How so?" "You move slower, but somehow you're more alive." It took me a moment to respond. "I think I finally realized time isn't something to beat," I said. "It's something to be in." She nodded as if she already knew. I started journaling again, but not just for myself. I began writing in a different tone, less searching, more offering, like I had something to give now, not advice, not answers, just presence. I shared short reflections online, a paragraph here, a small truth there, nothing big, no agenda. But slowly people began reaching out. A woman from Wisconsin messaged me, "I didn't know how to grieve my mother until I read what you wrote about the river holding your silence." A man in his 60s commented, "Thank you. I've been angry for so long and I didn't know it was just grief with a mask." I didn't respond to all of them. Sometimes I just sat with their words the way the riverman had once sat with mine. Not to fix, just to witness. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a small community event. It wasn't formal, just a circle of people gathered in the library's reading room, wood-paneled walls, dusty windows, the scent of old paper clinging to the air. I almost said no. Then I remembered how terrified I had been the first time I sat beside a man who said nothing and somehow said everything. So I went. I didn't prepare a speech, just brought my journal. When it was my turn, I walked to the front, opened to a marked page, and said, "I want to tell you about a man who sat by the river." And I did. I told them about how he never asked my name, about how he never gave me advice, about how he taught me more through silence than anyone else had through words. I told them about Eli, about the box beneath the tree, about the pebble I released into the water the day I said something I'd never said aloud. And then I said something I hadn't even planned to say. I think we all carry things that don't belong to us anymore. The room stilled, and I added, "The question isn't whether or not we're carrying them. The question is, are we ready to let the river take them?" When I looked up, some people were crying, but not one person looked away. After the event, a teenage girl approached me, skinny eyes too big for her face, arms crossed like armor. She said, "My brother died last year." I nodded, waited. She swallowed. "I haven't cried yet." I looked at her gently. "That's okay. No one gets it," she said. "They keep trying to make me feel, to break down." "Maybe you don't need to break," I said. "Maybe you just need someone to sit beside you." She blinked. Then she whispered, "Can I go to the river?" I smiled. "Yes, you can go any time." She nodded slowly, then walked away. And in that moment I realized something important. Stillness can be taught, not with lectures, but with example. That weekend I walked the trail again, back to the place with the wooden box beneath the tree. I brought flowers this time, lavender, my mom's favorite. I laid them beside the trunk without opening the box. I didn't need to. I sat down in the grass, let the light filter through the leaves, and thought of him, not with sadness, with thanks. Because some people don't just walk with you through a season. Some people shift the entire weather system of your life. At home, I found my dad sitting by the window staring out at the street. "How are you holding up?" I asked. He nodded, then surprised me by saying, "You've been good for your mother." "I'm trying." "No," he said. "You're being. That's the difference." I sat beside him. He added, "You were always going to find your way. Just had to stop looking in the wrong directions." We sat quietly for a while. Then he said, "You remind me of my father." "Really?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. He wasn't loud, but when he was in a room, you felt steadier. I didn't know what to say, but I felt the compliment, deeply. The next day, Mom asked me to take her to the river. We had to use a wheelchair. The trail was rough, but we went slow. When we reached the bench, I could tell she was tired, but her eyes were alive. I knelt beside her as the water murmured in the background. She said he used to come here when he was younger. "Who?" She smiled faintly. "Your father, before you were born." I blinked. I never knew that. "He stopped after your grandfather died." I looked at the river. Everything felt like a circle. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny stone. She held it out to me. "I found this the last time I came, when I was alone." I took it. It was white, smooth, cold. I want you to keep it, she said. I didn't ask why. I just closed my fingers around it and nodded. When we got back to the house, she was exhausted. She slept most of the afternoon. I sat by her side reading poetry aloud to her, even though her eyes were closed. That night I dreamed of the bench. Only this time I was the one sitting on it. And someone younger, unsure, was walking toward me. They didn't ask anything. They just sat. And I understood it had begun. It began quietly, without ceremony. There was no sign, no trumpet, no moment of realization. Just me, on the bench, alone. And someone walking toward me. I wasn't trying to become him. I wasn't even sure I could. But that morning, after days of returning to the river without him, something inside me shifted. The bench wasn't just a place to rest anymore. It had become a threshold. That morning, a man in his 30s approached. He wore a tie loosened like a noose after a long night, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't say a word, just nodded at me, uncertain, like someone standing at the edge of a confession they hadn't yet formed. I gestured softly to the open space beside me. He sat. We didn't speak. For almost 20 minutes, the only sounds were birds overhead, the river dragging the air gently between us, and the occasional sniffle he tried to hide. And then he said it. One sentence. My wife left. I didn't ask why. Didn't ask what he had done or what she had said or who had packed the boxes. I just let it land. And when he looked at me searching for something in my face, I gave him what I'd once been given. Stillness. Presence. The kind of silence that makes space for truth. It wasn't a role I'd chosen. But somehow I knew how to do it. Because someone had once done it for me. And in that moment, I realized the bench had never belonged to him. Not really. It had always belonged to whoever was ready to listen. That evening I told my mother. She was sitting up in bed, her skin pale, a scarf wrapped around her head, her eyes soft with some new kind of light. He would be proud of you, she said. I don't even know his name. You don't need to. We sat together in her room, the windows open to the sound of crickets, and I showed her the stone she'd given me last week. I brought it to the river today, I said, but I couldn't throw it. Then it isn't done teaching you yet. The next week, a girl came. Teenage. Hoodie pulled tight over her head, hands buried in the front pocket. She didn't sit, just stood a few feet away, as if trying to decide whether she was interrupting something sacred. I looked at her, nodded. She hesitated, then sat. After a while, she muttered, I failed my exams. I didn't offer advice. She continued, my dad says I'm wasting my life, that I'll end up like... She stopped herself, looked away. You don't have to believe every story people write about you, I said softly. She blinked. I didn't elaborate. She didn't need me to. She just needed someone to remind her that the narrative wasn't finished. When she stood to leave, she asked, Are you a teacher or something? No, I said, but someone once sat beside me when I needed it. She looked confused, then smiled. Thanks. And so it went, one person then another. They came not every day, but often enough that I began to understand something he had once told me, how the river gives not on command, but when invited. These people didn't come for advice. They came to unload. And I didn't take what they gave me. I let the river take it. That's the secret, I think. The river isn't just a metaphor. It's a participant. You don't hold on to someone else's sorrow. You witness it. You offer it a place to breathe. And then you let it go. One morning I brought a notebook to the bench. Not to write in it. To leave it. I placed it beneath the bench in a small plastic case, and inside the cover I wrote, If you need to speak but have no one to speak to right here, this river listens. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't check it the next day. I just left it. And when I did finally look 2 weeks later, the first page had been filled. Neat handwriting, carefully printed. I told my mother I was gay today. She cried. I think it's okay. But I needed somewhere to put this. Below it, someone else had added a note. I don't know you, but I'm proud of you. I closed the book and placed it back in the case with care. Something was blooming. Not loud, but real. At home, Mom was declining. Her breath shallower, her voice softer. But her eyes remained unchanged, still oceans I could lose myself in. One night she asked to see the river one last time. We went after dusk. My dad and I lifted her gently into the car. The trail was darker than usual, but the moonlight made the path glow. We brought her to the bench. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I feel it," she whispered. "What?" "The peace in you." I didn't speak. I just placed my hand over hers. She looked out at the water and said, "I don't need to be scared anymore." And I understood she wasn't talking about death. She was talking about leaving me behind. But I wasn't scared either, because I had the river now. And it had me. The morning after she passed, I went to the bench alone. I brought the white stone she had given me, held it for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, I walked to the edge of the water. I didn't say anything out loud, just held the stone to my chest. Then let it go. The splash was small, but the moment wasn't. I walked back to the bench and sat down. The river moved on, and so did I. After she passed, the house felt quieter. Not empty, just changed. Grief has its own texture. It doesn't always arrive loud and breaking. Sometimes it shows up as silence that presses against your skin like humidity before a storm. It lingers in doorways and teacups and the faint scent of lavender on a pillowcase no one has touched. My father didn't talk much during those days. He moved gently through the house, touching things as if they were glass. He trimmed the garden every morning, but the hedge near the lavender bush remained untouched. I think he couldn't bring himself to disturb the last thing she'd said she loved. I didn't push him. He was learning to live around the loss. So was I. But unlike other times in my life when grief had threatened to swallow me whole this time, I didn't drown. Because I had the river, I still returned every morning. The bench had started to change literally. A small heart had been carved into the armrest initials beneath it. A smooth stone collection had begun to gather by the base of the tree. Someone had tied a blue ribbon around the leg of the bench, and it flapped gently in the breeze like a silent prayer. I didn't know who was leaving these things, but I didn't need to. That was the gift of the river. It didn't ask who you were, only that you come open. I checked the notebook one morning and found 5 new pages filled. Letters, confessions, bits of poems, scribbled apologies. One entry simply said, "Today I didn't jump. I don't know if I'll feel that again. But today I stayed." I placed a second notebook next to it. Left a pen. Didn't write anything myself that day. Just sat. The people who came to the river didn't always speak to me. Many just nodded. Some sat in silence. Others offered a line or two enough to say I was here, but not enough to be known. And yet, we knew each other. Not by history. By stillness. In time, I began to visit the city again. I had lunch with my old boss. She asked when I was coming back. "I'm not," I said. She blinked. "Are you retiring?" I smiled. "I'm starting." "Starting what?" "Life, I think." She laughed nervously. "You always were a little poetic." But she didn't ask further. That was fine. Not everyone will understand the river. It's not their fault. Some people need to stand in noise a little longer before silence feels safe. I began writing letters. Not emails. Handwritten letters. I mailed them to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, former colleagues, a teacher who once told me I could write even when I didn't believe it. The letters weren't long. Sometimes just 3 or 4 sentences. But each one said what I had been too distracted or too afraid to say before. "Thank you. I remember what you did. I never stopped carrying that kindness." Most of them didn't respond. A few did. One reply came from a man I hadn't seen in over a decade. He'd been my neighbor when I first moved to the city. I barely remembered his last name, but he wrote back, "You don't know what this means. I was in a dark place when I received your letter. Thank you for reminding me that I mattered to someone." I cried when I read that. Not because I was proud, but because I finally understood that presence echoes. Sometimes for years. Sometimes into places you never see. One rainy afternoon, a woman approached me at the bench. Mid-50s hair, pulled back umbrella closed and dripping. She sat, looked out at the river, and after a while said, "My son died in this water." I turned slowly. She continued 3 years ago. Car accident. He skidded off the bridge above. I didn't speak. She didn't need comfort. She needed witness. She said, "At first I hated this place. Couldn't drive by it. Couldn't think about it without tasting metal in my mouth. She looked at me. But then one day I parked, walked down here, sat where you're sitting now, and I realized the river didn't take him. It held him. It caught him. She reached into her coat and pulled out a smooth white stone. I come every year. I bring a stone. I give it to the water. She stood, walked to the edge, and placed the stone gently on the surface. It floated a second before disappearing. She came back, nodded, and said, "Thank you for keeping this place warm." Then she left. I watched her go, and I thought, this is what we do. We hold space until others can breathe in it. That evening, my dad knocked on my door. He stood in the hallway, hesitant. "I read your letter," he said. I hadn't known if he would. I nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he came over and hugged me. That hug lasted longer than any we'd had in years. Then he said, "She'd be proud." "I know," I whispered. "I think I am, too." I began teaching part-time at the local library. Not formally, just writing group storytelling circles. Sometimes 5 people showed up, sometimes 15. One evening, a high school boy came and said nothing the entire session, but at the end, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "Thank you for not making me talk." I didn't know if I was building something, but it felt like something was building me, shaped by river and stillness and silence, shaped by grief and the way it teaches you to listen more than speak. I wasn't trying to change the world anymore, just trying not to run from it. One night I returned to the trail beneath the tree. I brought no stone, no flower, just myself. I opened the box. Inside was the photo him and Eli, still safe, still whole. I placed something new beside it, a folded page from my journal. I hadn't told anyone, but the man's name had finally come to me weeks earlier, only once by accident from an elderly man in town who'd seen me on the bench and asked if I was that boy who talks like Patrick did. Patrick, that was his name. I didn't need to hear it again. But I wrote it on the page quietly. "Your silence changed my life. You taught me how to stop measuring days by output and instead by presence. You taught me how to stay. Thank you. I'll sit here a little while longer." I folded the note, placed it gently in the box, and closed it. Then I walked back to the bench and waited for whoever came next. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. He walked down the trail toward the bench with the kind of defiance that only small boys possess. Chin lifted like he was daring the river to laugh at him. Fists balled into the sleeves of a sweatshirt that hung too big on his frame. His shoes were untied. His hair was a mess. His eyes were red. I saw him from a distance and didn't move. Just sat. Let him approach. When he reached the bench, he didn't say anything. Didn't ask if he could sit. Just plopped down hard on the other end, arms, crossed legs dangling off the edge like he was determined not to need anything. Especially not someone like me. We sat in silence for a long time. I've learned not to interrupt silence when it's doing its job. After a few minutes, he kicked at a loose rock near his foot, then mumbled, "My dog died yesterday." I turned slightly toward him, nodded. He sniffed. His name was Crater. He had one weird ear that never stood up. It always flopped down like a sad pancake. I smiled gently. He was my best friend. Silence again. Then suddenly his voice cracked. "My dad said we can get another one next month, but I don't want another one. I want him." His shoulders shook. He tried not to cry, but his body betrayed him. The tears came fast and hot, the kind you try to swallow, but end up choking on. I didn't move closer. Didn't offer a hug. Didn't say I'm sorry or it'll get better or any of the grown-up words that fall flat when a heart first breaks. Instead, I said, "I think he'd be proud of how you're remembering him." The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve. He peed on the couch once, he said, and chewed up my Spider-Man. But I didn't care. He used to sleep next to me every night. We sat quietly. Then I reached into my coat pocket and handed him something small. A flat gray stone. He looked at it. "What's this?" "A place to put a memory." He stared at it like it was made of gold. Then he held it close to his chest. "Can I keep it?" "Of course." He nodded. His breathing slowed, his fists unclenched. After a while he stood, shoved the stone into his pocket and turned to leave. He hesitated halfway down the trail, looked back. Are you always here? Most days. He nodded once. Okay. And then he was gone. I didn't see him again for a few weeks. But the next time he came, he brought a friend. A girl with pigtails and a cast on her arm. They sat together. She didn't talk. He did all the talking. This is the guy who listens, he told her. I raised an eyebrow. That's me now. He grinned. Yup, you're Riverman too. I chuckled. That's a big title. I gave it to you, so you have to keep it. The girl nodded solemnly, then said, My grandma's sick. I nodded, waited. And just like that, we were 3. The thing about children is they grieve without rules. There's no map, no shame. One second they're crying, the next they're telling a joke about farts, and neither moment is less real than the other. They move through pain, not around it. And I wondered as I watched them toss pebbles into the river and yell out imaginary pirate names, whether that was something we forget as we grow. That grief isn't a room you stay in. It's a bridge you walk across. And sometimes you pause, sometimes you dance, sometimes you crawl, but you keep moving. Later that day, I found a note in the journal beneath the bench. I sat here with my daughter today. We didn't talk much, but she held my hand the whole time. I think that was enough. I smiled. That's the lesson the river teaches over and over again. Being present is never nothing. It is always something. Sometimes it is everything. That evening, I stopped by my dad's house. He'd been clearing out drawers in the back room, things my mom had kept but never sorted. He handed me a shoebox, said, These are yours, I think. Inside old photos, a watch, a stack of drawings I'd made as a kid. One in particular caught my eye, a crooked sketch of a bench beside a river with 2 stick figures and a tree that looked more like cotton candy than bark. At the top, in crayon, me and the man. I stared at it for a long time, because I remembered that moment. He had been there even then. I just hadn't known who he was yet. Or maybe I had. Maybe children see truth long before adults name it. The next day, the boy returned alone. He didn't sit right away. Just stood beside the bench holding something behind his back. What's that? I asked. He looked down. I made something. He held it out, a small wooden figure, a dog, roughly carved with one ear flopped down. For you, he said. So you remember Crater too. I took it carefully. Thank you. He looked at the river. Do you think dogs go there after? To the river. He shook his head. Wherever. I paused. I don't know. But if they do, I think they remember the people who loved them. He nodded. Then he knows I did. He stayed a while that day, quieter than usual, watching the water. When he left, he gave me a small wave. I placed the wooden dog in my coat pocket, carried it home with me, and set it beside the white stone my mother had given me. That night I wrote, There is no age where grief becomes easier, but there are places that make it softer. Places that say, you don't have to carry this alone. A week later, a woman I didn't recognize came to the bench. She sat down, hands trembling, and whispered, I haven't been here in 15 years. I didn't press. She looked at me carefully. My brother used to come here, a long time ago, before he... She swallowed, before he disappeared. My breath caught, but I said nothing. He used to talk about the river like it was a person, like it listened. She paused. I thought he was crazy, but now I'm starting to wonder if he was just ahead of me. I nodded. We sat. Eventually, she left a flower on the bench. Didn't say why. But I knew. The river remembers. Even when we forget. There are some people you imagine you'll never see again. Not because they've left this world, but because you've locked them away in a drawer labeled too much. Too much pain, too much history, too much of what you couldn't handle when it happened. So when I saw Thomas standing at the head of the trail, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, scanning the river like someone lost in a city he used to know, my breath caught in my chest. He looked older, not in the way faces wrinkle, but in the way hearts weigh down shoulders. The last time I saw him 10 years ago, we didn't exactly part on peaceful terms. He had been my closest friend. More than that, almost a brother. We'd grown up sharing secrets and dreams, talking about everything from comic books to the kinds of fathers we wanted to be someday. Until he betrayed me. He didn't steal money. He didn't sleep with someone I loved. It wasn't one of those betrayals. It was the quiet kind, The kind where you're crumbling and call someone in the middle of the night, and they don't answer. The kind where you need to be believed, and they choose not to. That kind of betrayal doesn't scream, it echoes. He stood there, now hesitating. I didn't wave, didn't call out, just waited. Because if the river has taught me anything, it's that people come when they're ready. And sometimes they don't come for answers, they come for air. After a minute, he walked down the slope and sat at the far end of the bench. The exact same distance I had once sat from a man who never asked my name. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said softly. I could say the same. He looked straight ahead. His profile was thinner, his jaw tighter. "I heard about your mom?" I nodded. "She was a good woman," he said. "Made the best blackberry pie on earth. She taught me silence," I said. "In her own way." He glanced at me, surprised. "You've changed." "I hope so." Silence stretched between us. This wasn't the warm, healing kind. This one was dense, thorned. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A photo, old and bent. He passed it over. Us, maybe 20, on the edge of someone's porch, holding guitars, smiling like nothing could ever bend us. "I kept this all these years," he said. I looked at it. Didn't smile, but I didn't give it back either. "Why are you here, Thomas?" He swallowed. "To see if I could breathe again." I waited. He added, "I don't think I knew what I did to you. Not fully. Not then. And now, I know I left when you needed someone. I told myself you'd be fine, that you didn't need me hovering. You disappeared. I know. You believed someone else's version of me. You didn't even ask." He winced. I thought you'd rather not talk about it, that you were already ashamed enough." "I wasn't ashamed," I said. "I was breaking." He looked down, and for the first time I saw it not regret, but remorse. There's a difference. Regret wants to undo things to make you feel better. Remorse sits in the fire and says, "I know this hurt you. I'm not leaving now." "I carried it," he whispered. "Longer than you know. The guilt. Why didn't you ever write?" "I didn't think I deserved to." I looked out at the river. "I used to fantasize about what I'd say if I saw you again." He waited. I continued. Most versions ended with me walking away. "Are you going to—" "I'm sitting." "That's something." He nodded. The breeze was soft that morning. The river quieter than usual, as if it too had paused to listen. And then something I hadn't expected happened. He cried. Not loud. Not messy. But it was real. And it cracked something open in me I didn't even realize was still clenched. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a loosening. A releasing of the grip on a memory that once defined your pain. I didn't tell him it was okay. It wasn't. I didn't say I understood, because maybe I never would. But I did let the part of me that carried his silence go. And that was enough. He stood to leave. Turned to me. "I don't know if we'll ever be close again," he said. I nodded, me neither. "But thank you for sitting with me." And then softer. "Thank you for not hating me." I looked at him. I did. For a while. But that was heavy. I've learned to put down heavy things. He smiled, eyes glassy. Then turned and walked back up the trail. I stayed a while longer. Stared out at the river. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel healed. I just felt lighter. Like someone had untied a knot I forgot was there. That afternoon I found a new entry in the bench journal. I forgave someone today, not because they earned it, but because I earned peace, and beneath it, in a different hand. That's the kind of brave that no one claps for. But it changes everything. Later that night I sat in my mother's old room. My dad had been cleaning it slowly, gently. He left most of her things untouched, as if she might walk back in any minute and ask where he put her scarf. I found one of her notebooks she used to scribble recipes and grocery lists, but also little quotes she liked. Near the back she'd written, "Don't just forgive the person. Forgive the version of yourself who stayed angry too long." I closed the book and wept. Because I had needed that. Because sometimes you are the one you have to forgive. That weekend I hosted another writing circle. We met by the river this time. The group had grown 10, maybe 12 people now. Young and old. A retired teacher. A single dad. A woman who'd lost a son. I didn't run the group like a class. I didn't teach. I invited. We wrote about forgiveness. Not the pretty kind, the complicated kind, the what if it happens again kind. The I wanted to hate you, but it ate me too kind. And when it was over, we didn't read aloud. We just placed our pages into the current, watched them float, dissolve. And I swear to you, you could feel the river take something from each of us. The leaves had just begun to turn when she came back. I didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was longer now, pulled into a braid that hung down her back. She wore a navy coat buttons slightly mismatched, and her boots were muddy from the trail. She walked with the cautious rhythm of someone searching for a memory they weren't sure was still there. When she reached the bench, she paused, looked down at it like it was an old friend she didn't know how to greet. Then she turned to me. "It's you," she said. I blinked and it clicked. The girl with the cast, the pigtails, the one who hadn't spoken much the first time she visited the river years ago now. The boy had brought her. Her grandma had been sick. "You remember me?" she asked. "Of course," I said softly. "How's your arm?" She smiled. "Healed." She sat beside me and looked out at the water. Her presence was still quiet, but different now, deeper. Like the river itself had grown through her, somehow shaping the silence inside her into something strong. "My grandma passed a year after we came here," she said. "But I kept coming, even when no one was here. I'd just sit and listen." I smiled. "The river's good company." She nodded. "Better than most people." We sat for a while without speaking. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small book. Not the journal under the bench, her own. She placed it on her lap, fingers tracing the edges. "I want to give something back," she said. "To me, to the river. And to you. You sat with me when I didn't know how to say anything. That mattered." I didn't know what to say, so I listened. She opened the book and began to read. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just a few short poems. One about watching someone die without understanding what death meant. One about sitting beside water and feeling a presence bigger than grief. One, my favorite, about a bird that landed beside her once and didn't fly away even when she cried. When she finished, I looked at her and said, "You found your voice." She nodded. I think the silence gave it to me. That afternoon, she stayed until sunset. We talked. Not just about grief, but about what came after it. She was in college now, studying social work. She wanted to help kids who didn't have safe places. Her words, not mine. I asked if she still wrote. "Every day," she said. "And you still come here?" Sometimes she shrugged. "Not as much. I guess I didn't think I needed it anymore." And now, she looked out at the water. "I think I was wrong. I think we always need it. Maybe not the bench, but the stillness, the being with, the remembering how to slow down enough to hear our own soul whisper back." I could have cried, because that was it. That was everything I had spent years trying to give without knowing how to explain it. She had understood it without me saying a word. She returned the next day with a small wooden sign. Together we planted it in the soil behind the bench. Burned into the wood were the words, "This is a place for what your heart can't say. Sit. Let the river listen." The seasons began to shift quickly after that. Fall was short this year. Trees turned from green to gold to bare in a matter of weeks. The river's edge became quiet again, fewer visitors, more wind. But somehow I never felt lonely. Because I had learned presence doesn't require a crowd. My father called one morning and asked if I could help him sort through the attic. We hadn't touched it since my mother passed. We found boxes of winter clothes, dusty photo albums, and a worn-down cardboard container full of cassette tapes. Most were labeled with years 92, 93, 94, but one caught my eye. It said, "To you whenever you need it," in my mother's handwriting. I held it like it might break. "Do you have a tape player?" I asked. He nodded. "I'll bring it down." We listened to it that night. Her voice crackled through the static. "Hi, love. I don't know when you'll find this, or if you'll ever listen to it. But I wanted to say some things while I still can without worrying how you'd look at me afterward." I closed my eyes and listened. She talked about little things, how she loved the way my father danced in the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. How proud she was of me for finally learning to sit still. how she used to sit by the window and pretend the tree outside was talking to her. "I hope you find peace," she said, voice cracking near the end. "Not the kind you chase. The kind that finds you when you're brave enough to stop moving." Then silence. Then static. Then nothing. I didn't cry right away. But when I went to the river the next morning, I brought a pebble I'd been holding onto for months. One I'd refused to let go of. I placed it in the palm of my hand, whispered, "Thank you," and let the water take it. That evening I found a new note in the bench journal. "I brought my daughter here today. She asked why we were sitting with a stranger. I told her, because sometimes we meet people who help us remember how to feel." She didn't understand, but she sat anyway. I think she will someday. A week later, the girl returned, Poet Girl, now a young woman. She brought a group with her. 6 of them, all around her age. She introduced them with quiet pride. "This is my writing circle," she said. She looked at me. They needed a place to come. I told them about here. They stayed through dusk. They didn't read aloud that first day. They just listened. And I sat a little to the side, heart full, hands quiet, knowing something had completed a circle I didn't even know I was walking. I wasn't the only one who could hold space anymore. And for the first time, that didn't make me sad. It made me believe something I'd only hoped before. The river outlives us all, and the stillness, it multiplies. The first frost arrived in late October. It crept across the riverbank like a whisper, lacing the leaves with delicate white veins that melted by mid-morning but never left without leaving something behind. I sat on the bench, breath visible in the cold air, hands wrapped around a thermos of weak coffee. I was watching the boy, the one who had once cried for Crater, now taller, thinner, with a new dog at his side. A mutt. One upright ear, the other flopped. I smiled when I saw it. He waved at me from a distance but didn't sit, just passed by with his headphones in, mouthing the words to a song I'd never know. I didn't need to. He was okay. That was enough. And somehow I knew it was time. The thought had been knocking for weeks, quietly, patiently. But that morning, it sat beside me like an old friend and said, "You've done what you came to do. Maybe it's time to leave." I didn't argue. Not because I wanted to go, but because the river had taught me how to recognize when a chapter is done. And this one was. I'd always believed leaving meant loss, that to step away from something sacred was to dishonor it. But what if leaving wasn't a retreat? What if it was a release? A gentle untying, the way a mother lets go of her child's bike seat and watches them ride away for the first time. You stay just long enough to become unnecessary. And then you let go. I told my father that evening. We were eating dinner in his kitchen, chicken soup too salty because he doubled the bouillon cubes without telling me. He stirred his bowl, then looked up. "You sure?" "I think I've been sure for a while." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet. Maybe nowhere. Maybe everywhere." He smiled. "Your mother would approve. She always said we're not trees. We don't have to stay rooted to one spot forever." I laughed. She said that after living in the same house for 40 years. Wisdom doesn't require consistency. We both chuckled. Then quietly he reached across the table and took my hand. "You changed, Miles, for the better." "I know." It wasn't arrogance, it was peace. Over the next week, I visited the river every morning. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to say goodbye with intention. I walked the path slower. I watched the leaves fall in spirals like dancers who knew the show was ending. I checked the bench journal. It was nearly full now, entries layered like a time lapse of human ache and hope. Someone had drawn a tree with hands for roots. Someone else had written, "I sat here with my anger. It left before I did." I placed a second journal beside the first and tucked a note inside the cover. "To whoever comes next, you don't have to be wise or quiet or ready. You just have to sit and let the river do what it does best, carry what you can't." I wasn't sure how to tell the others. The poet girl, now a leader in her own right, came by on Thursday. She noticed I seemed different. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "You're ready." Her eyes misted. "But I'm not you." "No," I said. "You're you. That's better." She exhaled, looked at the bench. "You think it'll be okay?" "I know it will. Because of the river, because of you." I spent my last evening at the river alone. No visitors, no children, no journal entries, just me. I brought a candle, one of my mother's old tea lights. I placed it on the bench, lit it, watched the flame flicker in the wind, but never go out. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I spoke out loud. "Thank you," I whispered. Not to anyone, or maybe to everything. To the silence. To the man who once sat here before me. To the grief that cracked me open. To the strangers who let me hold their pain. To the boy and his dog. To the river. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a final stone. This one was different. Smooth and black, etched faintly in gold ink with a single word. Stay. It had been given to me by someone who didn't know I'd be leaving. I looked at it for a long time. Then with a deep breath I set it on the bench. Not in the water. Not in the box. Just there. And I walked away. The next morning I didn't return. I packed my things. A single duffel. The little carved dog. The photo of me and Thomas. The tape of my mother's voice. A few journals. And a note I left on my kitchen table. Gone for now. But you'll know where to find me wherever silence grows strong enough to speak. A week later I got a letter. Handwritten. No name, just, "I sat on the bench today. I didn't know you, but I felt you. Thank you for keeping it warm until I got there." I folded it, placed it in the back of my journal, and smiled. Because that's the thing. You don't have to be remembered to have mattered. You just have to love something enough to let it outlive you. And I did. The town had no river. That surprised me more than it should have. It had a creek winding and narrow cutting through the southern edge of a small public park, but no real body of water, no wide current to carry away heavy things. And yet the quiet here felt familiar. It was in the way people nodded as they passed each other. It was in the sound of wind brushing past wind chimes outside old porches. It was in the heavy stillness of the bookstore that smelled like cinnamon and paper dust. I didn't come looking for anything, just air, just space, but sometimes the places that find you are better than the ones you look for. I rented a small upstairs room above a hardware store. The window faced west. Every evening, golden light would spill in and rest on the floor like it belonged there. I didn't bring much, just one duffel, a few old notebooks, a tin of tea my mother once loved. On my first night, I sat on the creaky porch chair and watched the street. It reminded me of a quieter version of my younger years, people moving slowly unbothered by urgency, as though they had long since stopped measuring worth by motion. That calmed me. I had learned what it meant to slow down. Now I wanted to learn how to live there. The next morning I found the local library, small, single-story, tired-looking but proud. Inside, a woman at the desk glanced up with eyes sharp and kind. "First time?" she asked. "Just moved here." She smiled. "Welcome. New folks don't usually find us so fast." "Old habit," I said. "Libraries are like anchors." She handed me a card form without needing my name. "Book clubs meet on Thursdays," she said. "And if you like to write, we have an empty room out back where the kids used to do crafts." I blinked. "Do people still write together here?" She shrugged. "Not really. But maybe you could change that." I paused, then smiled. Maybe I could. It started with a flyer. I wrote it by hand. A quiet hour, for words that need somewhere to go. No pressure, no reading aloud, just space, bring a pen, or don't. Wednesdays, 5 p.m., back room. I posted one at the library, one at the diner, one at the laundromat with the broken dryer that always smelled like burnt lint. I didn't expect much. So when one person showed up the first week, a woman named Elise with a notebook covered in floral stickers, I was grateful. She wrote quietly the whole hour, didn't speak a word. When it ended, she said only thank you and left. The next week, there were 3, then 5, then 9. We never introduced ourselves. No icebreakers, no expectations. Just a table, a circle, silence filled with pens scratching and pages flipping. Some stayed after and talked. Others left as quietly as they came. But the room, it held something. Like the river had followed me here after all. One night a young man lingered after the others left. Late 20s, messy hair, nervous eyes. "I know you," he said. I looked up. He shook his head, embarrassed. Not no, just from the internet. I raised an eyebrow. He pulled out his phone, showed me a photo of the bench, my bench, with the tree behind it, a candle glowing beside a stack of notebooks. I saw this a few years ago. Someone posted about a man who sat and listened, who stayed when no one else did. He looked at me. That was you, wasn't it? I didn't answer. He smiled. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that place helped me, even if I never went there. We sat in silence. Then he added I tried to build a bench like that in my head, on the hard days. He tapped his chest. I called it the Inside River. I didn't know what to say, so I said what the man who came before me might have said. I'm glad it helped you stay. He nodded, eyes shining. Would it be okay? He asked if I brought my brother next week. He doesn't talk much, but I think he'd like this. Of course. Thanks, he said. And then with a grin, you're still doing it, you know. Sitting. I smiled. So are you. A month passed. Then 2. The weather turned colder. People brought blankets, mugs of tea. One woman knitted during the meetings and said the rhythm helped her think. Someone left a small journal on the back table one night, open to the first page. Write whatever doesn't fit anywhere else. By the 3rd week, it was nearly full. There were poems, questions, names written in bold, then scratched out. One line simply read, Today I wanted to disappear. Then I remembered the sound of pen on paper. That was enough. That night I walked home slower than usual. There was no river here, but in every window I passed, I saw its stillness. People breathing through pain in quiet ways, sharing warmth without noise. The river had never been about the water. It had always been about what people gave themselves permission to feel when they stopped running. I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watched the stars. Then, out of nowhere, I remembered the carved wooden dog, the one the boy had given me years ago. I reached into the box where I kept the few things I still carried. There it was, one upright ear, one floppy. I held it in my hand for a while. Then I stood, walked 2 blocks, to the edge of the creek. The water barely moved, but it was enough. I knelt beside it and placed the little dog on the bank. Not to let it go, but to let it rest. There are things we carry not because we haven't healed, but because they remind us we did. It came in a plain envelope. No return address, no stamp. Just slid under the door of the hardware store one morning, addressed to the man who used to sit. I didn't open it right away. I knew somehow I needed to be still first, so I carried it with me, tucked it in the inside pocket of my coat like a stone I wasn't ready to let go of yet. That evening I walked to the edge of the creek. The air was sharp with winter's first breath, but I didn't mind. I sat on the old park bench where I now held quiet hours with strangers, and I opened the letter. It was handwritten. Tight cursive, simple paper, unfolding like a whisper. I hope this finds you, or if not you, someone who once sat beside you. My name is Rowan. I'm the granddaughter of the man who used to sit on that bench before you ever did. I found your name in one of his old notebooks, tucked between a leaf and a torn-out journal page. I'm writing because I think it's time you knew. He didn't start the bench, but he kept it going, just like you did, just like someone else will after you. My fingers tightened on the page. She continued. When he passed, we found a small wooden box in his closet. Inside were 5 stones, each with a name. Yours was the last. My breath caught. She went on. He said you would come when you were ready, that you'd sit and listen and carry what others couldn't. And when your time came to go, you'd leave behind something beautiful, something bigger than healing. I went to the bench last week. It's still there. So are your stones. People still come. They still write. And someone added a plaque. It says, for the ones who stayed, for the ones who sat, for the ones who made silence a place we could be whole again. I set the letter down slowly. My hands were trembling, but not from the cold. The next morning I packed a small bag, just a notebook, my mother's tea tin, and one final stone. This one was blank, because I didn't know what it would say yet, only that it would know when it got there. I arrived at the river by sunset. The path looked the same worn, leaf-covered familiar in that quiet way places become when they've seen you broken and stayed. The bench was still there, Older, worn smoother by time and rain, but still there. And someone, maybe Rowan, maybe someone else, had placed fresh flowers on either end. There was a new notebook in the carved box. It was already half full. I flipped through its pages. People still came, still wrote, still healed. One page stopped me cold. In a child's handwriting. My mom said when people leave, they go to the stars. But I think they also go here, because it's where I feel closest to her. I closed the book gently. Then I sat down. The wind picked up, brushing through the trees like a soft exhale. And I whispered to the air, I came back. Not because I was needed, but because part of me never left. I stayed until dark, lit one of my mother's tea lights, let it flicker beside me on the bench. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the final stone. It wasn't blank anymore. On the way here, I had finally carved what it needed to say. Not a name, not a quote. Just one word. Remember. I placed it beside the others. 5 now. Each one shaped by someone who once chose to stay. I stood to leave. Took one last look at the river. It didn't speak. It didn't shimmer. It simply kept flowing, like it always had, and always would. As I turned to walk away, a boy rounded the bend in the path. Maybe 10, maybe 12. He stopped when he saw me. I nodded, he nodded back. Then without a word, he walked past me and sat on the bench. Alone, small, still, he looked out at the water and smiled. I kept walking. And as I did, I realized something. I hadn't been the keeper of the river. The river had kept me, and now it would keep him, and whoever came next, and after that. Because the quiet never ends. It just finds new voices, new hands, new hearts willing to stay long enough for the weight to fall away. This is not a story about one man. It never was. It's about what happens when we choose not to run, when we sit, when we listen, when we love without noise, and trust that what we leave behind is never really gone. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and events are entirely made up. If you've ever carried something heavy and found relief in silence, this story was for you. If it moved you, inspired you, or helped you breathe a little deeper today, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And remember, sometimes all we need is a place to sit and someone or something to help us let go.